Yeah. So if we are live right now, thank you, Rene. I will be spending the next 20 minutes more or less talking about questions of trauma again.
Yes, absolutely. Nicholas, as I come back on live, you will see my excitement as we're about to cover two very important questions. You will just confirm when you can be able to see me again. Uh, but
Yeah.
however, we have two very fundamental questions that we're going to cover. And I'm very excited to get into it with you. In fact, just to quickly pick off from where we left off from the last video, the last live stream, we were getting to cover an anecdote I wanted to share with you. Can I just cover it quickly before we get to the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
two
sure.
questions?
By all means, bring it up
Yes,
again. It
yes,
was an interesting case.
yes. So, uh, Nicholas, so there's this individual, this young boy, from where I am from. Um, he happened to lose both his parents in a very tragic accident. And the very curious thing about this individual, this young boy, he's still a child, he's barely 11. His cause of trauma was that he wasn't able to give his parents a funeral that really they were deserving of, and he wasn't even really concerned about the trauma of the tragedy of their passing in itself. So that was a curious case, and I just want to maybe, can we cover that possibly in this next question of the different types of trauma?
Yeah,
Can we categorize those two incidences as different types of trauma? The trauma of the incidents that you have no parents, you're an orphan, but you're carrying this weight of, I have to give my parents a deserving funeral and I can't be able to do that. So I
yeah,
feel traumatized. Are
yeah,
those two different kinds of trauma?
yeah. If you came to me and explained this to me, as a what is the age of this young man now?
Right now, it was about 4 years back. Right now, he's about 15.
Okay,
Uh, at the event, he was 11.
right. So the attitude that I would have towards a 15 years old would be different to the attitude that I would have to an adult like you, who is nearing the 30s. Also because the it's still very fresh of an event for a 15 years old. It's just 4 years ago. Normally speaking, we wouldn't expect such a tragic event overlayered by another sort of layer of pain to do with culture and expectations and how he was able to meet those expectations. Um, so meeting the real person might lead me in different way of answering. Okay, let's keep that in mind because the counseling process is very, very individualized. So here, if we broach this topic a bit more generally, then what we are seeing is that this person went through a shock trauma, which is the first kind of trauma type that we often talk about. And shock traumas have anything to do with shocks. Okay, so but shocks are generally generated by either nature or man-made causes. So, for example, um, recently, for example, we heard a shooting happening in Sydney. Um, I think last year we heard of, or it was this year, I'm not sure, but there was a bridge collapse, like in the USA, like a whole bridge completely collapsed, and there were people that died on that bridge. These are unique events, and they are very sudden, and they bring fatalities. So whether they bring a fatality, a death, or if they bring a permanent injury, that would still fall within, the category of shock trauma. Although let's remember here that trauma is not the event itself, but trauma is the state of high alert and stress that normalizes after the event and that stays constant, throughout life until you start to intervene and heal. So it's not precise to say a shock trauma. It's a shock, first of all, it's an accident. And then if there is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, those two things combined make the word shock trauma. And we are making some assumptions when we're saying shock trauma. We are saying that this person had a shock, and we're saying that this person is still in a post-traumatic stress condition. Okay. Um, so in the
Um,
case of your friend or this person that you know, losing both parents means losing both caregiving references. And at the age of 11, this young man is just about to enter puberty, so adolescence. And usually in this period, um, the father becomes an extremely important figure for him to know how to step into the world of adults. So between the age of 11 and 18, the father is very, very important figure for the boy to because the boy needs to learn how to be in the world, and usually he does so by copying the model of his father. So that is out. And then at 11, you're kind of still a boy, right? Like even our voices start to change at that age, right? Particularly as a man,
mm,
but it goes in and out, right? So very much
mm,
psychologically, it's very much the same. So the boy at 11, he still needs his mom just like a little boy does, and that also disappears. If we tune into the pain that this child may have gone through, we would be just mourning for the whole session of the 20 minutes today,
yeah.
right? So there is the shock, and then there is the developmental trauma that steps in, which is the other type of trauma, because this will be an ongoing pain that will reveal itself over the coming years as he grows into an adult. So his capacity to grow into a normal adult has been truncated. It's like half of his body has been almost cut into half. His body cut into half almost. It's difficult to even now as I'm trying to connect to the case. It's difficult to properly tune in into the kind of pain this boy might be going through. At the beginning, you need to know that most shock events are met with denial. So the first thing that happens is a form of denial, like this is not happening to me. This is not important. Life is still the same. I'm going to get through it. All of these are forms of denial, and they're there to protect us from becoming completely paralyzed by the event, because we would be inclined not to eat, not to sleep perhaps anymore. Depression could set in, and we might want to do silly things in those states, such as killing ourselves. So there are protective mechanisms within us that attempt to keep us going, basically. And denial is a very fundamental protective mechanism in those situations. So you have shock for the accident, and then you have developmental trauma because of this missing caregiving element, which is so fundamental to the normal development of a human being. At adolescence, this is still considered a critical age of development. So what we mean by that is that this phase of development between 11 and 15, more or less, is still very critical to your brain development. Your brain is actually pruning down neurons, because I want to remind my audience that we are actually born with many more brain neurons that we end up with as adults. But your experiences are basically telling your brain what to do with those neurons and which one to cut off and which one to keep there. And at the age of adolescence, your brain is still informing its view of the world and its view of itself and life based on the experiences that it is having. So experiencing this same thing at 30 years old, it's very, very different than experiencing it at 11. Very, very different. because 30 is not a critical age of development, 11 is.
Mm.
eh? So to
Okay.
answer briefly here, shock traumas, developmental traumas. And I hope the example that you've given and me trying to relate to it has provided some material to relate to these two categories. How are you processing this yourself?
This is a very extensive explanation you've given. It's very good because actually it's taken almost like 12 minutes. So we have about 8 minutes left for the next question that you can probably touch on, which is you just mentioned neurons on memory loss and it causes memory loss. So I would actually like you to touch on that. However, before that, if you could do it just maybe in very shortly, what I feel about this question of different types of trauma, do you think that we can categorize it when it comes to whether primary or secondary trauma? Because hearing this story from him, I felt some kind of trauma myself. So can we categorize it, the trauma, other than shock and developmental, as someone who is receiving that news, as someone who is listening to that news?
Yeah,
Can I experience some trauma in that as you also go to the next question?
yeah,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much.
So what you are talking about is vicarious trauma. Yeah, you could
Yeah.
call it secondary trauma.
Mm.
It's the kind of trauma that we as therapists are very vulnerable to as well. We hear these traumatic stories and we can become traumatized ourselves. So yeah, there is such a thing as experiencing well, you don't have trauma, but you experience empathically the stress in this person, and so you get vicarious sort of forms of stress. If this vicarious stress that you're getting, if this tension that you're getting from the person that is traumatized lasts for more than 6 months, then we would be talking about vicarious trauma again, right? Trauma only steps in again once 6 months have elapsed and your state of stress and alert continues on and on. And also, I forgot to mention about this layer of him, not being able to fulfill the funeral issues. I think we would need to dedicate a whole session just to look at the kind of cultural beliefs that surround these kind of events and the expectations that were laid upon him, and how this situation actually disconnects with some books that I hear about how you can become parentified by your parents. What happens? Some parents fail to fulfill their parental role, and they ask the child to become their own parents. And in that situation, the child is suddenly brought into a situation where he needs to act as an adult and he doesn't have the maturity to act as an adult. And that alone is a developmental cause for trauma.
Mhm.
For example, my father lost his father when he was 7, and suddenly he was brought into the position of being the man of the house. He had an older sister, but he had to be the man of the house, and this caused so many emotional issues in his life that later on, when he had me and my sister and his wife and so on, a lot of things came to the surface in that respect. So this is quite a common situation, but again, it's quite a big topic. Mm.
Thanks so much. That it is quite a big topic, and in fact, talk about another big topic that we have on the, can this trauma cause memory loss? If you can discuss it a bit, and maybe we can have some point to also pick it up again if it's very extensive on the
Yeah,
next session, part three. What do you think about it? Does
yeah,
trauma cause
absolutely.
memory loss?
Again, I think it's an important topic. So first of all, yes, the answer is yes. Um, and there are two reasons for this. On the one hand, a shocking event, whether it's a shock or it's a developmental event, for example, think of sexual abuse in within a family. Often, sexual abuse actually happens within a family, like with people that we know, rather than with external people, as we tend to think. So, think a child is being sexually abused. over and over, that's a developmental trauma. Or if it only happens once, that you could call that a shock trauma, but it's also developmental trauma because it's happening at a critical age of development. But both events could create a split off in the psyche. So literally, the psyche creates a split within itself, and it puts one part of it in the unconscious and out of the memory system, and it begins to build an identity only on this side. So you can meet people that are adults who have gone through tremendous shocking realities as children, but they cannot access those memories because the psyche is really, really split. And so EMDR, for example, and hypnosis, these are techniques that can access these split off memories. But yes, they can be very, very, very buried under the psyche. So that's one way in which shock and developmental traumas can affect memory. The other way in which it does is more on a daily basis, in the sense that, again, trauma is a state of alert, hyper alert, a state of stress, hyper stress, that is not normal to most people. And that state of hyper stress means that in your body there is a lot of stress hormones, cortisol in particular. And cortisol is implicated in inhibiting, in stopping us from retrieving memories and from laying down new memories. Um, it affects our sleep because we are stressed. We begin to sleep much less, so much shallower sleep. And we need deep sleep to be able to lay down events that have happened during the day and turn them into long term memory. So, whatever we are studying today, if I want to turn those memories into a long term memory, I need to have good sleep to be able to, for my brain to do that. And if there is a lot of cortisol in my brain is not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to get the sleep that I need. And also, just as as a neurotransmitter, cortisol just impedes this short-term to long-term memory transfer. The other, and this is the last one, the other part that gets affected by stress is working memory. So working memory is the kind of memory that we need to remember dates, to remember where we have put things, to remember names, to remember events, to memorize a list of tasks, for example, um, like a to-do list. It's working memory is kind of the to-do list scenario, and this also gets heavily affected by trauma. So when we are feeling triggered, for example, immediately your working memory goes out of the window. If, for example, you have migrated to a new country and you have learned a new language, much of that new language relies on working memory, and that working memory will be affected, and therefore your language expression will be affected, and therefore your contact with other people will be affected. That's how deep and
Wow.
far these things go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite intense and quite, yeah, insightful how this can be impacted. And for those who actually were watching, and you mentioned EMDR, just to mention that you actually give EMDR. So anyone who actually has joined the live session today, you can actually reach out to him on yourshrinkinbandsco.com. Thank you for all of those who have been participating. I also look forward to our next live next week. For all the subscribers, you will get a notification of when this live will be, on which date. Thank you so much, Nicholas. It has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you
Um,
so much.
and guys, feel free to reach out, yourshrinkinbandsco.com. We are really looking forward to hearing from you. Until next time, Nicholas, bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.